The night was still, the air thick with tension. Lights flickered in the distance as a lone figure crept through the shadows, clutching a bulky suitcase. This was no ordinary homeowner. This was Karen, the tyrannical president of the Homeowners Association, and she was on a mission. Sneaking past the manicured lawns and security cameras, Karen made her way to the home of her latest target, Dr. Emma Sinclair. The good doctor had been a thorn in the HOA's side for far too long, daring to question their authority and fight their draconian rules. But tonight, the tables were about to turn. As Karen approached the Sinclair residence, a low growl echoed from the bushes. She froze, her heart pounding, only to come face to face with a pair of glowing eyes. It was Dr. Sinclair's illegal pet, a rare and exotic creature that the HOA had deemed unfit for the neighborhood. But this was no mere pet. It was a fierce, untamed animal, and it was about to become Karen's undoing. The creature lunged, its razor-sharp claws slashing through the air. Karen scrambled to open the suitcase, fumbling with the latch as the animal closed in. With a triumphant grin, she pulled out a tranquilizer gun and took aim. But before she could fire, the creature pounced, knocking the suitcase from her hands and sending its contents spilling onto the ground. Karen's eyes widened in horror as she realized the true nature of her scheme. The suitcase wasn't filled with evidence to incriminate Dr. Sinclair. It contained a rare and endangered species, stolen from a nearby zoo. The tables had turned, and Karen was the one caught in the act. As the animal snarled and cornered its would-be captor, the sound of sirens pierced the night. Someone had called the police, and the jig was up. Karen's reign of terror was about to come to a crashing halt. The sirens grew louder, the flashing lights cutting through the darkness. Karen's eyes darted around, searching for an escape, but the creature blocked her path, its eyes burning with a primal fury. "Stay back, you filthy animal," she hissed, her voice trembling with fear. But the creature refused to be cowed, its massive form looming over her like a harbinger of doom. As the police cars pulled up to the curb, Karen knew her time was running out. She had to think fast, to find a way to turn the tables once more. Mustering all her bravado, she shouted, "This is an outrage. I am the president of the Homeowners Association, and I demand that you arrest that beast immediately." The officers hesitated, unsure of how to proceed. They had received reports of a disturbance, but they certainly hadn't expected to find the HOA president in the midst of a confrontation with a wild animal. Seizing the opportunity, Karen continued her tirade. "That creature is a menace to our community. It must be removed at once." She gestured wildly, hoping to sway the officers to her side. But the creature had other plans. With a deafening roar, it lunged forward, knocking Karen to the ground. The suitcase lay open, its contents spilling out. A rare and endangered species, stolen from a nearby zoo. The officers stared in disbelief, their hands moving to their holsters. "This is all a misunderstanding," Karen cried, her voice laced with panic. "I was simply trying to protect the neighborhood from that thing." The officers exchanged a knowing glance. They had heard enough. "Karen Wilkins, you're under arrest for the theft of a protected species and attempted assault. You have the right to remain silent." As the officers rid her Miranda rights, Karen's world came crashing down. The HOA, her source of power and influence, had been her undoing. She had become so drunk on her own authority that she had lost sight of the true purpose of the organization: to serve the community, not to control it. Now, as she was led away in handcuffs, Karen knew that her reign of terror was over. The tables had turned, and the very community she had sought to dominate had risen up to hold her accountable. But the story was far from over. As the police cars disappeared into the night, the creature watched, its eyes gleaming with a newfound freedom. For Dr. Sinclair, this was just the beginning of a battle against the corruption that had plagued their neighborhood for far too long. The morning sun peeked through the curtains of Dr. Emma Sinclair's living room, casting a warm glow over the scene of the previous night's events. As the dust settled, Emma couldn't help but feel a sense of both relief and unease. She had spent years fighting against the tyrannical rule of the Homeowners Association, led by the now incarcerated Karen Wilkins. But even with the HOA president behind bars, Emma knew that the battle was far from over. Stepping outside, Emma surveyed the neighborhood, her eyes drawn to the flashing lights of the police cars still parked on the street. The creature she had rescued, a rare and endangered species, had been taken into custody, its fate uncertain. "This isn't over," Emma murmured, her jaw set with determination. She had to find a way to protect the animal and expose the full extent of the HOA's corruption. Across town, in the cold, sterile confines of the police station, Karen Wilkins paced her cell, her mind racing. She had always prided herself on her ability to manipulate the system, to bend the rules to her will. But this time, she had been caught red-handed, with no way to wriggle out of the charges. "This can't be happening," she muttered, her perfectly manicured nails digging into the palms of her hands. "I am the president of the Homeowners Association. I am the law in this neighborhood." But as the reality of her situation sank in, Karen's bravado began to crumble. She had underestimated the power of the community she had sought to control, and now she was paying the price. In the days that followed, the fallout from Karen's arrest rippled through the neighborhood. The HOA, once a bastion of power and influence, found itself in disarray. Homeowners who had previously lived in fear of the association's rules and regulations now found the courage to speak out, demanding transparency and accountability. Emma, emboldened by the turn of events, stepped up to lead the charge. She rallied her neighbors, organizing town hall meetings and petition drives, all with the goal of dismantling the corrupt HOA once and for all. As the investigation into the stolen animal deepened, the true extent of the HOA's misdeeds began to emerge. It was discovered that the association had been using its influence to secure lucrative contracts with local businesses, funneling the profits into their own pockets. The revelation sent shockwaves through the community, shattering the illusion of the HOA's benevolent leadership. In the midst of the upheaval, a surprising ally emerged, the creature that had been at the center of the initial confrontation. The animal, a rare and endangered species, had been rescued from the clutches of the HOA and placed in the care of a nearby wildlife sanctuary. Emma, determined to ensure the creature's safety and to prevent it from falling into the wrong hands again, began to work closely with the sanctuary's staff, forging an unlikely partnership that would prove crucial in the battle against the HOA. As the days turned into weeks, the fight for the neighborhood's future raged on. Karen Wilkins, once the untouchable queen of the HOA, found herself stripped of her power and facing the prospect of a lengthy prison sentence. The community, emboldened by their newfound sense of unity and purpose, refused to back down, determined to reclaim their homes and their way of life. The walls of the police station echoed with the sound of Karen Wilkins' desperate pleas. She had been transferred to the county jail, where the harsh reality of her situation had finally begun to sink in. "You don't understand," she cried, her manicured hands gripping the bars of her cell. "I am the president of the Homeowners Association. I have friends in high places. You can't just keep me here." But the guards, hardened by years of dealing with similar outbursts, remained unmoved. They had seen the evidence, the damning footage of Karen's nocturnal activities, and they knew that her days of wielding power and influence were over. As the days dragged on, Karen's desperation only grew. She had spent years cultivating a network of connections, using her position on the HOA to secure favors and leverage. But now, those connections seemed to be crumbling, one by one. Meanwhile, in the heart of the neighborhood, Emma Sinclair and her newfound allies were working tirelessly to dismantle the corrupt HOA. They had secured the release of the rare creature from the wildlife sanctuary, and were now working to return it to its natural habitat. "This is just the beginning," Emma declared, her eyes shining with determination. "We're going to expose the full extent of the HOA's crimes and make sure that no one ever has to suffer under their rule again." The community rallied behind her, using social media and grassroots activism to spread the word and gather support. Homeowners who had once lived in fear of the HOA's wrath now stepped forward, sharing their stories of harassment, unjust fines, and unfair policies. As the investigation into the HOA's activities deepened, more and more skeletons began to tumble out of the closet. It was discovered that the association had been using its power to line the pockets of its board members, awarding lucrative contracts to businesses owned by their friends and family. The revelations sent shockwaves through the community, shattering the illusion of the HOA's benevolent leadership. Homeowners who had once blindly trusted the association now demanded accountability and transparency. In the chaos, Karen Wilkins found herself increasingly isolated. Her once powerful connections had all but vanished, and even her own legal team seemed reluctant to take on her case. The weight of her crimes was beginning to catch up with her, and she knew that her days of wielding unchecked power were over. As the trial date approached, Emma and her allies continued their relentless pursuit of justice. They had uncovered evidence of widespread corruption within the HOA, and they were determined to ensure that every single individual involved was held accountable. The courtroom was packed on the day of the trial, with homeowners from across the neighborhood filling the seats. Karen Wilkins, her once impeccable appearance now disheveled and unkempt, stood before the judge, her eyes darting nervously around the room. The prosecution presented a damning case, laying out the evidence of the HOA's misdeeds in painstaking detail. The jurors listened, their faces etched with a mix of shock and outrage. As the verdict was read, the courtroom erupted in applause. Karen Wilkins, the once untouchable queen of the HOA, had been found guilty on multiple counts of fraud, embezzlement, and abuse of power. In the aftermath, the community celebrated their hard-won victory, but they knew that the battle was far from over. The HOA had been dismantled, but its legacy of corruption and control still lingered, and it would take time and effort to truly heal the wounds that had been inflicted. The dust had begun to settle in the aftermath of Karen Wilkins' trial, but the wounds left by the Homeowners Association's reign of terror still ran deep. As the community worked to pick up the pieces, Emma Sinclair knew that the true battle was only just beginning. The HOA had been dismantled, its former leaders facing the consequences of their crimes, but Emma couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to uncover. She had devoted countless hours to the investigation, poring over financial records and interviewing homeowners, and yet she couldn't shake the sense that there was something darker lurking beneath the surface. It was during one of her late-night research sessions that Emma stumbled upon a lead that would change the course of the investigation forever. Buried deep within the HOA's financial records, she discovered a series of suspicious payments, large sums of money being funneled to an unknown account. Determined to get to the bottom of the mystery, Emma began to dig deeper, enlisting the help of a forensic accountant to trace the origins of the payments. What they uncovered was nothing short of shocking. The money was being used to fund a secret real estate development project, one that was being kept hidden from the community. Emma's heart raced as she pieced together the puzzle, realizing that the HOA's corruption ran far deeper than anyone had suspected. With this new information in hand, Emma knew she had to act quickly. She gathered a team of trusted allies, including some of the more vocal homeowners who had been instrumental in the fight against the HOA, and they set out to uncover the full extent of the conspiracy. As they delved deeper into the investigation, they uncovered a web of deceit and manipulation that made their previous battles seem like child's play. The HOA's former leaders had been working in cahoots with a shadowy real estate developer, using their position of power to strong-arm homeowners into selling their properties at below-market rates. The revelations sent shockwaves through the community, and Emma knew that they were now up against a force that was far more powerful and dangerous than they had ever imagined. The real estate developer, a ruthless and calculating individual, had been using the HOA as a front to expand his empire, and he was not about to let a group of determined homeowners stand in his way. As the battle lines were drawn, Emma and her allies found themselves facing a seemingly insurmountable challenge. The developer had deep pockets and a well-connected network of allies, and he was willing to stop at nothing to protect his interests. The community rallied, however, drawing strength from the hard-won victories of the past. They organized protests, staged sit-ins, and launched a relentless media campaign determined to expose the truth and hold the developer accountable. The pressure began to mount, and the developer's allies started to distance themselves, unwilling to be associated with the growing scandal. Emma and her team sensed an opportunity, and they moved quickly to capitalize on the momentum. In a daring move, they filed a class action lawsuit against the developer, alleging fraud, racketeering, and a host of other charges. The case quickly gained national attention, with the media casting a spotlight on the ongoing battle between the community and the powerful real estate mogul. As the trial date approached, the tension in the neighborhood reached a fever pitch. Everyone knew that the outcome would be a defining moment, not just for their community, but for the fight against corruption and abuse of power everywhere. The courtroom was electric with anticipation as the trial against the shadowy real estate developer began. Emma Sinclair and her team of allies sat at the plaintiff's table, their faces etched with determination. They had come too far to back down now. As the opening arguments commenced, the scope of the developer's misdeeds began to unravel. Witness after witness took the stand, testifying to the coercive tactics and underhanded dealings that had become the hallmark of the HOA's reign. Emma listened intently, her mind racing as she pieced together the full extent of the conspiracy. The developer had exploited the HOA's power to target vulnerable homeowners, using a combination of threats, intimidation, and backroom deals to force them out of their homes. The prosecution's case was airtight, and as the trial progressed, the developer's defense began to crumble. His once formidable network of allies had either distanced themselves or turned against him, unwilling to be associated with the growing scandal. But just when it seemed that victory was within their grasp, a shocking revelation came to light. It turned out that the developer had been using his influence to manipulate the judicial system, securing the allegiance of a corrupt judge who was presiding over the case. Emma's heart sank as she realized the gravity of the situation. They had been fighting an uphill battle from the start, but this new development threatened to derail everything they had worked so hard to achieve. Undeterred, Emma and her team regrouped, determined to find a way to expose the judge's corruption and ensure that justice was served. They dug deeper, uncovering a web of collusion and bribery that stretched far beyond the confines of the courtroom. As the evidence mounted, the developer's desperation grew. He had invested too much time and resources into this project to let it all slip away, and he was willing to do whatever it took to protect his interests. In a daring move, Emma and her team decided to take their case directly to the public, launching a massive media campaign that shone a spotlight on the developer's misdeeds and the judge's complicity. The community rallied behind them, flooding social media with calls for accountability and justice. The pressure proved to be too much for the developer and the corrupt judge to withstand. As the trial drew to a close, a shocking twist emerged. The judge, faced with overwhelming evidence of his own corruption, made a last-ditch attempt to salvage his reputation by turning on the developer, providing damning testimony that ultimately sealed the defendant's fate. The courtroom erupted in cheers as the verdict was read. The developer found guilty on a litany of charges. Emma and her team had won a hard-fought victory, but they knew that the battle was far from over. The community had been through so much, and the scars of the HOA's reign would take time to heal. But as they celebrated their triumph, they knew that they had set a powerful precedent, that even the mightiest of power brokers could be held accountable when the people stood united. In the aftermath of the trial, Emma and her allies turned their sights to the task of rebuilding their community. They knew that the road ahead would be long and arduous, but they were more determined than ever to create a future where the abuses of the past could never be repeated. As the dust settled in the wake of the developer's trial, the community of Emma Sinclair and her allies found themselves facing a new challenge. The daunting task of rebuilding a neighborhood that had been shattered by years of corruption and abuse. The HOA's downfall had left a power vacuum, and there were those who sought to fill it, each with their own agendas and visions for the future. Emma knew that if they weren't careful, the same cycle of corruption could begin anew, with a new group of power-hungry individuals seeking to assert their dominance over the community. Determined to prevent that from happening, Emma and her team set out to create a new, transparent, and accountable system of governance, one that would give the community a true voice in the decisions that affected their lives. They started by establishing a series of town hall meetings, inviting all homeowners to come together and share their ideas and concerns. The response was overwhelming, with residents from across the neighborhood flocking to participate, eager to have a say in the future of their community. From these meetings, a new governing body began to take shape, a community council comprised of elected representatives from each neighborhood. The council would be responsible for overseeing all aspects of community life, from the maintenance of public spaces to the enforcement of zoning laws and the allocation of resources. But Emma and her allies knew that simply creating a new governing structure wasn't enough. They also had to address the deep-seated mistrust and resentment that had been sowed by the HOA's reign of terror. To that end, they launched a series of initiatives aimed at rebuilding the community's sense of unity and pride. They organized neighborhood cleanup days where residents worked together to spruce up their streets and parks. They held block parties and cultural festivals, celebrating the diversity and richness of the community. Most importantly, they established a system of transparency and accountability, ensuring that every decision made by the community council was open to public scrutiny. They created a comprehensive website where residents could access detailed financial records, meeting minutes, and other vital information about the council's activities. The response from the community was overwhelmingly positive. Homeowners who had once lived in fear of the HOA's power now felt empowered and engaged, eager to play a role in shaping the future of their neighborhood. But just as the community was beginning to heal and thrive, a new challenge emerged, one that would test the resilience and resolve of Emma and her allies. It started with a series of mysterious fires, each one targeting the homes of prominent community council members. The authorities were quick to investigate, but the perpetrators remained elusive, leaving a trail of destruction in their wake. As the investigation progressed, it became clear that the fires were not isolated incidents, but rather part of a coordinated effort to undermine the community's newfound stability. Emma and her team knew that they were up against a powerful and determined adversary, one who was willing to stop at nothing to regain control over the neighborhood. Undeterred, they redoubled their efforts, working closely with the authorities to track down the culprits and bring them to justice. They also strengthened the community's emergency response plan, ensuring that residents were prepared to respond quickly and efficiently in the event of a crisis. The battle was long and grueling, but in the end, Emma and her allies emerged victorious. The perpetrators were apprehended, and the community council's hold on power was solidified. The neighborhood had weathered the storm and emerged stronger and more united than ever before. As the community celebrated their hard-won triumph, Emma knew that the journey was far from over. There would always be those who sought to exploit the system for their own gain, but she was determined to ensure that the hard-fought lessons of the past would never be forgotten. As the sun set over the transformed neighborhood, Emma Sinclair stood on her porch, taking in the sight of a community that had been reborn from the ashes of the Homeowners Association's corruption. Gone were the days of petty rules and tyrannical control. In their place, a new era of transparency, collaboration, and civic engagement had taken root. The community council, which Emma had helped to establish, had become a beacon of hope, a model for neighborhoods across the country that were grappling with their own battles against abuse of power. But the journey had not been an easy one. The fires that had threatened to tear the community apart had been just the beginning of a series of challenges that Emma and her allies had been forced to overcome. They had faced intimidation, threats, and even attempts on their lives, as the forces of corruption fought to regain their foothold. Yet, throughout it all, the residents of the neighborhood had remained steadfast, standing shoulder to shoulder with Emma and her team. They had rallied together, volunteering their time and resources to rebuild their community from the ground up, transforming it into a vibrant, thriving place that celebrated diversity, creativity, and civic engagement. As Emma surveyed the bustling streets, she couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. The once manicured lawns and pristine facades had given way to a more organic, lived-in aesthetic, where residents were free to express their individuality without fear of repercussion. Nearby, a group of children played in a newly installed community garden, their laughter echoing through the evening air. Emma smiled, knowing that these were the moments that made the struggle worthwhile, the promise of a brighter future, one where the mistakes of the past would never be repeated. But even as the community continued to heal and grow, Emma knew that the battle was far from over. The forces of corruption were still out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for an opportunity to strike. And so, she and her allies remained vigilant, ever ready to defend the hard-won freedoms that they had fought so hard to secure. In the distance, the faint sound of a siren pierced the evening calm, a reminder that the work of rebuilding a community was never truly done. Emma took a deep breath, steeling herself for the challenges that lay ahead. But there was a newfound determination in her step, a resolve that had been forged in the crucible of adversity. As she turned to head back inside, her eyes fell upon the rare creature that had been at the center of the initial confrontation with the HOA. The animal, now safely returned to its natural habitat, seemed to be thriving, a symbol of the resilience and strength that had carried the community through its darkest days. Emma reached out, gently stroking the creature's soft fur, and in that moment, she knew that the battle had been worth it. They had not just reclaimed their neighborhood, but had also carved out a space where the natural world and the human world could coexist in harmony, a testament to the power of collective action and the unwavering spirit of a community that refused to be broken. With a renewed sense of purpose, Emma turned and headed inside, her mind already racing with plans for the future. There was still much work to be done, but she was ready, more than ready, to face whatever challenges lay ahead. For in the end, the true victory had been in the journey itself. A journey that had forged an unbreakable bond between the people of this neighborhood, a bond that would continue to guide them, no matter what the future held.